Okie dokie. You see, I hate this bit. You know, the bit right at the start. It'd be so much better if, like, you had WWE entry music or something and an announcer. But yeah, okay. So my name is Karam. I'm a dev here at AO, and this is a story all about how I ended up with a $750 AWS bill. I know we've all had food, so we're all probably feeling a little bit sleepy. This certainly is by the looks of things. I normally just fall asleep right after eating. So I'm going to try and engage with people at the start. I know it can be a little bit awkward, try and wake everyone up. So who here uses AWS? Decent number of people, some nodding heads. Who here uses AWS outside of work? More people, awesome. Who here has spent more than $10 on AWS? 50? Is that like half a hand up? Has anyone spent 750 by accident? Me. 10 points for you. So yeah, for anyone that doesn't know what AWS is, basically, you probably hear the term cloud technology thrown about a lot in the tech world, and it's not actually things up in the cloud, or at least I hope we're not randomly putting very heavy servers on clouds. But basically, it's a magical thing where we host web applications and so on, and we refer to it as the cloud. And basically, one of the things that you can do on AWS, basically back in the day when you wanted to host a web app or some software, you used to have a heavy air-conditioned server room. We've got one in 5A in the building next door, and it would have very, very big computers in it, very powerful computers that were very expensive to run as well. And that was where we ended up putting these programs on and hosting them and giving people in the outside world access to them. And basically on EC2, on AWS, sorry, you can rent EC2 instances, and they're basically these versions of these very big expensive boxes, but all managed by Amazon. You know, so we don't have to deal with the hardware, etc., and all the overhead that comes with it. So yeah, unfortunately, I ended up spending a lot of money, and this is a story all about how. So hopefully by the end of it, when you all find out how I ended up with my $750 AWS bill, it won't happen to any of you guys. And this was pretty much how I then saw AWS going forwards, a little bit of a sad face. And to be honest, I messed up. Whilst we're here, out of interest, does anyone watch Law and Order? Cassia? Mo, Natalie, yes. I mean, last time I gave this talk, only one person, last time I gave this talk, only one person apparently watched Law and Order, which I found hard to believe. Oh no, the sound didn't work. Oh, technical difficulties. Oh no. So basically, you know, the dun dun sound that happens in Law and Order. Basically, as we go on this murder mystery, try and figure out how on earth I spent $750, there's meant to be that sound there. But basically, this is where it all started in this building. And on my phone, I've got an Android phone, and I've got the Microsoft Outlook app on my phone. And unfortunately, it seems like the Microsoft Outlook app has a bug on it. Or it could be Android, I'm really not too sure. But as I'm sure a lot of the software people in this room know, bugs are plenty. And I also have 4 different emails, one of which is my normal Hotmail email, my main email, one of which is my work AO.com email, and 2 other emails. And basically, every month at AO, we have to change our passwords for security reasons, fair enough. And it was that time of the month where my email, my work email, I probably could have worded that a little bit better, couldn't I? Where my email was constantly bugging me on my phone, asking me to change my password. And I'd also actually, early on in the week, changed another password on one of my other emails, coincidentally. And basically what was happening was I couldn't, after changing my domain AO password on my work laptop, couldn't get access to my work email on my mobile because this bug kept cropping up telling me to sign into this email, which the password I changed early on in the week that I forgot. So basically I couldn't actually enter my new password to log into my AO email, and it was really annoying. So the solution was obviously to just get rid of this email, delete that. If I can no longer get the the annoying message asking me to sign into this email, I'd then finally get access to sign into this email. And it seems quite straightforward. But as we know, when it comes to computers and things, nothing's always quite straightforward. Sometimes that's the fault of the software, kind of in this case, and sometimes it's the fault of the idiot using the software, which is yours truly. So I wanted to delete this email, and I accidentally ended up deleting 2 emails. And this email is the email I have linked to my AWS account. And you can probably see where I'm going with this. Bit of a mistake. It worked. Was the laptop muted? Was that why? Sorry. You know what? It's fine. I'm a software developer. I should be solving my own problems. So, I mean, this is a whole talk about. Let's not go there. So I was in my bedroom, the 11th of July, 2019, and I was doing a bit of dev, as you do, on AWS. I was making a little app at the time, and I wanted to use AWS Cognito that would allow me to do some logging in, and as you do, committing my code to GitHub, to fill in those green tiles because they make you feel good about yourself. And you can probably see where I'm going with this as well. Public repositories. And basically what had happened was I was using like my main computer at home, and at the time I never really regularly devved on it, and I didn't realize I actually had the AWS CLI installed. And now what the AWS CLI allows you to do is kind of store your AWS accounts, access keys and so on in a safe global place, so that you obviously don't have to embed them in your code, which is always a bad idea, as we'll find out in the end of this, by the end of this talk, or at least hopefully you'll walk away from this talk with that stuck in the back of your mind. Now, I didn't go all the way and paste, my keys into my code, but I tried to set up a debug environment in Visual Studio without realizing that Visual Studio obviously generates a JSON file where it stores these settings. And you could probably see where I'm going with this. So, half an hour later. Well, that doesn't look right. So basically what had happened was I'd made some changes, not actually realized that Visual Studio had obviously created this launch settings JSON file that I'd accidentally committed. And as a result of that, I'd committed my AWS secret key and my AWS access key. Nipped downstairs, made a coffee, nipped to the loo, as you do. Came back to it, and I thought to myself, let's chill out, calm down, we got this. It's fine. I know how to solve this. And obviously, the first thing I did was log into my AWS account, and I wanted to delete my access keys. If I delete my access keys, surely, in those 10 minutes, no one had time to go onto my GitHub account, nick the keys, and wreak havoc. It was only 10 minutes. But the reality of the situation was that as I was doing all this, thinking that everything would be okay, this was happening. So I received a lot of angry emails from GitHub and AWS to the email, because we're going back to the original story now, to the email that I accidentally deleted off my phone. So I wasn't getting the notifications for the emails. So all this was happening without my knowledge, saying things like, your AWS account has been verified for Sydney. Your AWS account has been verified for Tokyo. Why is my AWS account being verified in these places? Account closure, please read. And obviously, alarm bells should have been ringing, but I deleted this email off my phone. Also, meanwhile, this was all happening, I had removed these keys from my AWS account, thinking everything would be okay. So I went to sleep. And then 19 hours later, oops, I was at work. It was a Friday, tend to look forward to Fridays. Weekend coming up, you're in a good mood. Oops, went backwards. Yabba dabba do, time to go home for the weekend. Arrived home in a good mood, until, yeah, it all came crashing down. I checked my phone. And yeah, you can set secondary emails on your AWS account, which kind of come in handy somewhat, as we found out 24 hours later. My main email received an email telling me that my monthly AWS budget exceeded my threshold. My threshold is $20, and my account was at $690 odd. So you can imagine what was going through my head. Like, I thought it was spam or something. And, you know, the good news is that the email finally came through. The bad news is that I looked something a little bit like this. So I ran upstairs. And my parents were like, what's happened? What's happened? I've just come home. But I obviously needed to solve this problem. And this is what I saw. So I logged onto my AWS account, and this is just, I think it was potentially just southeast. Yeah, so this is just one availability zone. And all these very, very expensive EC2 instances. So going back to definition of EC2 instances, very, very expensive servers had been run up on my account. And understandably, they're very expensive. So this was my reaction. And some hacker clearly decided to take this approach and was spinning EC2 instances up left, right, and center on my account. That 10-minute window was enough for a bot to scrape my keys, run a couple of scripts, deal the damage, mine some Bitcoin overnight. And obviously, that had a knock-on effect to my AWS account and my AWS bill. And this guy was just spinning EC2 instances all over the bloody globe. So I decided to travel to Turkey and speak with the EC2 boss himself about, you know, whether I should have been using Lambda instead. If I'd been using Lambda, I probably wouldn't have run into this situation. Well, actually, I wasn't using EC2 either, but if I'd paid attention to my IAM credentials, I probably would have been in a better state, which we'll talk about in a bit. So just to give you guys a rough idea of what I kind of came home to, each one of these little EC2 icons is an instance that was spun up in a different territory on my account. So this guy was mining some pretty hefty Bitcoin. I mean, I don't know how much he made in the end, but I'm sure it cost me a lot more than he probably made. And this guy was just trying to take over the world on my AWS account. And here's proof of the bill, $755 by the time I managed to stop everything. There are all the different territories. And all this was for Bitcoin. But I always like to look on the bright side of life, as Monty Python once said. And yeah, $750 in my case wasn't actually too bad. So if you look on the internet, there's some instances where people have been through the same thing. Companies in this case it's pretty bad because the company, what basically happened was they brought someone in for an interview. And during this interview, the person being interviewed was expected to showcase some AWS skills. And funnily enough, the company apparently knew that that their keys had been leaked to GitHub, because part of the interview process was apparently committing code to GitHub for this company. And they had a 4-day weekend, bank holiday or something along those lines. They knew what had happened and thought that they would come back into the office over a very 4-day period and everything would be okay. Obviously, they came back to a $91,000 bill. This is an individual developer, very similar scenario to me. Probably didn't react as fast, and he ended up with a $14,000 bill. So why am I telling you all this? Basically, the overpriced train guy, Richard Branson, once said, you learn by doing and by falling over. Frank Sonnenberg, a popular author, said, smart people do stupid things. Stupid people don't learn from them. The special one, Jose Mourinho himself, said that with mistakes you make, you learn a lot. With the mistakes that others make, you also learn a lot. So that's basically why I'm here today, to make sure no one makes the same mistakes I did. So lessons learned. What are the lessons that we're going to learn today? And these are basically based on the tips sent to me by AWS support during this process. And they obviously closed my account, which means that they knew what was going on, even though the costs were accruing. And they try and hold your hand as much as possible to basically help you through the situation. Because obviously this has happened a lot of times before, so this wasn't anything new for them. So the first thing you should aim to do is familiarize yourself with the My Security Credentials part of AWS. Follow AWS Access Key and IAM best practices, and we'll look at these in more detail in a sec. Consider enabling something called Amazon Guard Duty. And there's something called the AWS Labs Git Secrets tool. So in terms of My Security Credentials, one of the main things you should be looking to do is enable multi-factor authentication. Now, in my scenario, multi-factor authentication wouldn't have necessarily solved my problem, but if you run into an issue where obviously your password, rather than your keys, are leaked for whatever reason, and we know how often passwords, are leaked nowadays, even if someone has your password, they can't gain access to your AWS account and wreak havoc if they don't basically have your mobile phone. And an additional thing you can do to help you with the access key issue that I did have is make sure you rotate them regularly. So even in the rare mad scenario where they do get leaked for whatever reason, yeah, as long as you're rotating them, that should hopefully help you out in the long run. So AWS Access Key and IAM best practices. So if you don't know what IAM is, basically it's the part of AWS that allows you to control permissions and derive different accounts from your root account. So basically we have EC2, we have Lambda, we have Cognito, whatever. AWS has loads of different services. So your root account is your main account that has access to all these services. What you should really aim to be doing is, if I'm building an app that only requires access to specific parts of AWS, rather than use my root access keys, in case they get leaked, you end up leaking only the keys that have limited access. So if I'm building an app that just uses Lambda and DynamoDB, for example, and those keys in some mad mental scenario like this one get leaked, yeah, they can't spin up EC2 instances, quite simple. So in the past, I believe, you used to be able to have access keys for your root AWS account. You can't have that anymore. AWS have stopped that, so you do have to create a new IAM user for the exact same reason we've been talking about for the past 10, 20 minutes. And again, like I said, best practices, create one or more IAM user. I like to now, after I've learned from my mistakes, create an IAM user per account. That way, I limit each application to only the permissions that it needs. And yeah, if your keys are somehow leaked, the damage obviously isn't to your whole root account. And there's also something called temporary credentials, which is quite obvious. I don't need to explain that, but you can probably see the value in it. Of course, don't stick your access keys into code. Sometimes, obviously, it happens, as we saw, where Visual Studio's been a little bit naughty. But use AWS SDK and the CLI. Get them installed. They'll help you with this, and hopefully you won't end up down the same rabbit hole I did. And you can play around with something called the IAM policy generator. Now, I'm not a massive fan of IAM, but some people are. I always find it a pain in the backside trying to figure out with all different permissions and stuff. They're not always obvious. But these are tools that exist to help you with them. And you can read more about the AWS Access Key best practices and IAM best practices. These are extremely long, so I've tried to, to be fair, the majority of the AWS documentation, so I've tried to summarize things at quite a high level, but these links will be available after. Number 3, we said Amazon Guard Duty. Now, this isn't free, but basically, TLDR, it's a threat detection service. I think it uses some sort of AI machine learning where it basically, over time, understands how your AWS account operates. And then, obviously, it intelligently spots potential threats in real time. And it's not necessarily just EC2 instances randomly spinning up, but it spots things like, for example, an unusual amount of exceptions and so And last but not least, we've got the AWS Labs Git Secrets tool. This was probably my favorite one. And I think, if you use AWS, everyone should be installing this tomorrow, if not this evening. And what it basically does is it's installed on your machine. And it prevents you committing passwords and other sensitive keys to a Git repository. And it's really easy to install on Windows. You just run a PowerShell script. If you're a Mac user, you can use Homebrew. And basically what it does is it sits in Git hooks, which is basically like a cool thing in Git, where it's almost like middleware in Git that sits between you and Git before you commit. And basically this tool will automatically run every time you do Git push or Git commit. And it uses some regex behind the scenes to make sure you're not committing anything that looks like an access key. And you can get that on GitHub, github.com/AWS Labs. So yeah, hopefully if you found this helpful, you can help me pay the bill off. I'm just kidding, of course. So basically, in conclusion, please be careful. AWS is awesome, but it can also be dangerous. And you might know what you're doing. I would argue that I knew what I was doing, but, shit happens, right? And the majority of people that fall victim to this, they are committed to some sort of public repository. And it's a very, very common mistake. Visual Studio shot me in the foot, and it was a work day, it was tired, sometimes you just want to go home and you're not fully focused, and mistakes are made. So just be extra careful. And really, we shouldn't even need to be extra careful because we have all these contingency plans in place that we've discussed today. So really, we've not got any excuses to not be utilizing them. It's not okay to ignore IAM best practices. This stuff should be taken seriously. Otherwise, you end up with a bill like I did. And at least install the Git Secrets tool. It takes literally 2 minutes. Don't rely purely on billing alerts. I've heard this before where people say, oh, I've got a billing alert, it's fine. Obviously, as we saw, I didn't get a billing alert until 24 hours later. The damage was done. And even when AWS emailed my main email saying, account closure, your account's been compromised, they didn't actually spin down the EC2 instances. No, they let the costs accumulate overnight. Great idea, Amazon. Yeah. But the good news is, I don't need anyone's donations. AWS knew my account was compromised, and they did credit me the $750 after 4 days. It was a ruthless 4 days. I couldn't sleep very well, but they did write the money off. And even though I was on free tier basic support, it was fantastic. And if it weren't for them, I wouldn't have been able, obviously, to put this talk together and almost relay the same knowledge back to you all to make sure none of you have to go through this to experience what I did. And on that note, thanks for listening. I'm an idiot. Any questions?